Welcome into another Key of David podcast. My name's Shane Baldwin, and I'm joining everybody from North Carolina. I've got with me Trevor Keys and David the Lion Douglas. And just so you guys know, when we set out on this adventure to create this channel, we decided we were going to do 100 videos in 100 days. I thought that would be really easy. Come to find out, it's not that easy. So we are literally finding and bringing on new and interesting guests, creating content to deliver a video a day for 100 days straight. And today we have our guest on, Brian Ferry, but I've only ever heard him called the Smoking Prophet. So before we go anywhere, we need to address who is the Smoking Prophet and how did you get that nickname, Brian? Oh, and welcome to the show as well.
Oh, thank you guys for having me. I'm pretty sure Trevor's the only one that calls me the Smoking Prophet, but that's okay. I suppose I will take both of those on. I do smoke, and I have been known to think like a prophet. I suppose I am not a prophet, by the way.
Well, I
Well,
gotta say where it came from. Brian's one of my best friends. I've known Brian for 20 plus years, and he came and worked at a company of mine, and he was our CMO. Brilliant guy. Any of you guys who know Brian, he's like one of the most brilliant guys out there. You know, used to work, ran the Intel Inside campaign, and a whole bunch of stuff. But we had the company that I was running was a summer sales company, right? And so we would recruit Mormon missionaries, return guys, and all of these guys like were lined up out of Brian's door. It's just like nonstop, just like sitting down with Brian, talking about Brian, and people come out and be like, "He's the smartest guy I've ever met. He knows so much. Did you know this? Did you know this?" And we had to like corral our guys and call meetings, and be like, "You guys, quit wasting Brian's time. He's like, you can't talk about the church nonstop in Brian's office." And then one of our guys called him. He's like, "He's the Smoking Prophet, bro." Like, he totally is. I'm like, that's a good name. That's what we're gonna call him.
I
So
didn't I didn't even know that's where that came from, but that's kind of funny. I'll tell you kind of a little bit about my story. I'm a proud fourth generation Mormon. My great great grandpa was one of the pioneers that came across the plains, and when I tell this funny story, when he came down Immigration Canyon, which was several months after the initial caravan arrived, he stopped right there at that place where Brigham famously sat up and said, "This is the place, drive on." And he sat up, my grandpa sat up and said, "Are you kidding me? This is where we're going?" Like, so he got to Salt Lake and immediately said, I'm not staying here. So he petitioned Brigham Young to allow them to go south. So they settled in southern Utah, and my great great grandpa, when he joined the church, really funny story, maybe for another episode, but he was a greengrocer in England, and that basically means he went around to farms and got corn cobs and whatnot and sold them on the street corner. Not a highly intelligent man, so to speak, right? So he gets to Loa Wayne County down here in southern central Utah, and Brigham Young appointed him to be the territorial magistrate. So he was the judge. And one of the first cases that he heard was Butch Cassidy, who lived right in the area and was kind of a troublemaker, right? Uh, and so I trace my roots all the way back to the beginning, so to speak. On my other side, my other great great grandfather was one of Joseph Smith's bodyguards in Nauvoo. Probably not a very good bodyguard, apparently, but so I have a long history in the church, and I had when growing up, I grew up in Orem, and like most, I hope, like most teenagers, I was quite rebellious, right? I did pretty much everything you're not supposed to do. And if my ward said BYU, I said Utah, right? So I was just always this contrarian growing up. And when I graduated from high school, I don't think I had been less active. I think that's the proper term. I had been less active for quite a long time. I had moved out. I lived on my own, and didn't even know who my bishop was during that time. And when I turned 18, I had my own business and a girlfriend that we were going to get married. Kind of this whole story, right? Well, one one afternoon, I was living up in the foothills of Provo, and I would go up the canyon. I'd go up Rock Canyon and just go for a hike or whatever, right? And this one night I went up there and I hiked up. If you know Rock Canyon, there's a little area that they call the kitchen, and there's a crack in the mountain called the chimney. And we would climb up this chimney, no ropes, no nothing like that. I can't believe we didn't die. Like, it's 200 feet tall. So I climbed up it, and the sun was just starting to go down. It was beautiful. The sunset was amazing. And I ended up getting to the top, and I sat on the edge of the rock, and I was dangling my feet over, and I had the most surreal experience in that moment that I have ever had in my life. And what happened is it just kind of flashed through my life or my mind that all I would need to do is just slide off this thing, and I would just disappear. I would be dead. And that made me really, I can't even describe it. It made me really contemplative for some reason. And I had this really amazing experience where and I don't know how folks will feel about this, but it was the first time in my life I had ever felt the Spirit, and I actually knew that that's what it was. I don't, and even now when I tell the story, I get these goosebumps because it literally changed my life. I came down off the mountain, and I was just in this state of, oh my gosh, like, all that stuff that I was told growing up is real. And I got to figure out what that means. And so I drove out to Orem, and I went to who was this guy who was my last bishop. He was the last time I knew who my bishop was. He wasn't still the bishop in the ward, but I knocked on his door and I asked him if I could come in and talk to him for a minute. And so I went in and I talked to him, and for about an hour. And basically all I said was, this is what just happened to me, and I don't know what to make of it. I don't even know what it means. And he's one of those guys that is just kind of and and then I left. And about 2 weeks later, I got a mission call in the mail, which I was floored. Like, I thought there was like a process that you had to go through to get a mission call. And here it was. Like, I actually, I was living, my roommate was my aunt, and she got the letter, and it comes in an envelope that has the church's logo on it. And she calls me and she says, you got a letter from the church. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And I said, they're probably going to kick me out. Like, that's literally what I thought was going to be in the letter. And so I get home and I'm reading it, and it's a mission call. And the mission call was to New Zealand. And I was like, wow, New Zealand, that's really cool. I would love to go to Scandinavia. I didn't even know where New Zealand was, right? Didn't even know where it was. So anyway, I called my mom and told her that I had a mission call, and she about fell off of her chair. And over the next, so I accepted the call. I'm like, I'm going to do this. I told my girlfriend that I'm going to do it. Could Anyway, uh, sorry about that. So I get this call, and I decide I'm going to go. And then uh, I go to see my parents down in Vegas. And this will actually be a good way to get into tonight's topic. So I go to my parents lived in Arizona. I go down there, and I said to my dad, I don't even know what to do. Like, what do I do first? And he said, well, you should probably go talk to the bishop here. So I scheduled an appointment. I went in, and I said, yeah, I got this mission call, and I haven't been active in the church for a long time. I don't even know what is the first step. And he says to me, well, maybe we should start with an interview. And I said, okay, great. Let's start with an interview. And he started asking me all these questions about things that I had done and possibly needed to repent of. And I distinctly remember saying to him, is there like a checklist? Because if there's a checklist, we can just check them all off. Like, I've done them all. Like, whatever it is bad, I did it. And so anyway, we talked for about 2 hours, and at the end of it, he gave me a temple recommend. I thought he was going to like put me on probation or like do something, and he gave me a temple recommend. I was like shocked. And then a couple hours later, the stake president gave me one, and the next day, I went to the Mesa Temple and took out my endowments.
And this is
And
like Alma the Younger.
oh, dude, it was nuts. I'm pretty sure when they raised the bar, they raised it like way over my head, like way over my head. And so the next day, my dad escorted me through, and I went through the Mason Temple for the first time, and I was absolutely enveloped by that experience. It was the most transformative thing I had ever been through in my life. I know a lot of people have sort of a weird experience when they go the first time, but for me, it was amazing. So I literally decided I'm going to stay in Mesa for the next 3 months, and I would go to the temple at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would leave at 10 o'clock at night. So for 3 months, I was just lived at the temple, and became so uh, enveloped is the only word I can use with the endowment and what the endowment really was. And that put me into this space of everything in my life began to be open. My eyes began to be open to what who we are. Really, that's what happened, is who it's a discovery of who we are. And so, and then I'll wrap this part of the story up. So I came back to Utah. I got the date that I was supposed to go to the MTC, and it was a couple months away. My parents flew up, they took me to the MTC. And by the way, my house is like 3 blocks away from the MTC. So I go to my first day, and I'm going to be really careful about the way I say this. I was not happy with my first day. My second day was even worse. On my third day, we were in a class, and it was in the evening, and the instructor was teaching us the proper cadence to say a prayer, which for me was really bizarre, because the experience that I had in the temple, and the experience that the new relationship that I had with Christ and the Spirit told me that there is no cadence to saying a prayer. Right. And granted, I was really immature. I was done. I literally walked out of the class. I went back to my little room, little flat, and I started packing my bags. Remember, I only got to walk 3 blocks, and I'm out. I'm done. And there was a guy in our zone. His name's Ray Hennessy. He's about 6'5", gigantic. He was 29 years old, I think. He was a lot older than us. Uh, Covered in tattoos, big giant skull rings. Had grown up in the Hell's Angels, converted to church, and got special permission to go on a mission. He's my kind of guy. Like, he's my kind of guy. My mission companion's father was a general authority. Not that there's anything wrong with that, just not my kind of guy. So this guy, Ray, he knocks on the door. I open it up. He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going home. Like, this might be for you. This is not for me." And he said, "Well, I'll give you 2 options. One, you can let me give you a blessing. And two, I'll kick your ass. You choose." And I said, "Okay, I'll opt for door number one. I'll take the blessing." So he opens the door, and my entire zone is standing out in the hall. They all come in, 3 sisters and 12 guys ish, and we set up a chair. And I will say this: I had gotten my patriarchal blessing sometime in that 3 month period. And when I got it, I'll be honest, I literally thought, this whoever this guy is that gave me this blessing is nuts, like literally off the rails, because my blessing was so strange, and some of the things that it said in it, I was like, there's no way this is about me. So that's in the back of my mind while I'm in the MTC. The other thing that's in the back of my mind, you guys, if you've been to the MTC, you know that 7 times a day, have you repented of everything? Have you repented of everything? Right. And I didn't repent of anything. So in the back of my mind was, holy crap, I'm not worthy to be here. So I had all these different thoughts. So, and again, my patriarchal blessing was just really strange. Like some of the things that it said, I've shared some of it with Trevor. It's got some weird stuff in it. So anyway, I sit down and this guy gives
I
me
would
this
I would
blessing.
call it cool, but at that time, without your understanding,
Oh, it
strange.
was weird. Even now, it's weird, Trev. I mean, some of it's just out there. Anyway, so we sit down. The whole zone, all the elders put their hands on my head, which is very heavy, right? It's like 12 guys, and Ray starts this blessing, and I'm just going to tell you the way it happened. I'm not changing anything. Some of it's a little strange, but he had, he'd grown up smoking his whole life, so he had a really raspy voice, right? And he laid his hands on my head, and he did the standard, called me by name and in the name of Jesus Christ and by the power of the Melchizedek priesthood. And then he just stopped. He didn't say anything for like 30 seconds, which is a really long time when you're waiting for the next thing to come out. And when he started talking again, his voice was this deep, resounding, confident voice like nothing I had ever heard. And the first words out of his mouth lit my body up to the point where I couldn't feel my body anymore. I literally felt like I was floating in the air. And the first words of it is out of his mouth was, "Fear not, thy sins are forgiven thee."
Mm.
That was the first thing he said. And I was like, holy cow. Well, then over the course of the next few minutes, he literally went line by line in my patriarchal blessing and repeated all of those things and added to them. It was like I was getting more of the blessing. And it was such an amazing experience. And I literally remember, because I'm a smartass too, I literally remember when I said amen, I also said the words, I can't believe this. Like, I literally did not believe what had just happened to me. Well, then they all leave. I get down on my knees, and it's the first time in my life I've actually prayed. Like, I've said prayers, but I actually prayed. And I remember saying in the prayer, because I'm kind of smart alecky, I said, "Great. Now I know I'm actually supposed to be here, but I have not read the Book of Mormon. I don't know anything about it. So you're going to have to help me know that the Book of Mormon is true." And then I went to bed. And then about 3 o'clock that morning, I woke up and I had no idea where I was. I was literally like, my mind, I didn't know where I was, and I was terrified. So I opened up the door and I ran down the hall, and I ran past the bathrooms, and I saw the shower, and I jumped in the shower, got cold shower, and it started coming back to me. And I remembered the experience from the night before. Well, I go back to my room, and I had gone to bed in one bed and I woke up in a different bed, which might be whatever. Maybe I slept walk, but I had unmade the bed and made this new bed, like tucked the sheets in and everything. And I don't remember doing it. And I thought, man, that is so weird. Anyway, I sat down at my desk. It's like 4 o'clock in the morning now. And I flipped open to the last page I had read, because I was trying to read the Book of Mormon. I don't remember what page it was. You guys can look it up. I think I was on page 6. And it's where Nephi is going back and forth to get the plates, the plates of Laban. And there's a passage in there that said, "I knew not beforehand what I would do, but I knew that the Lord would show me what to do," something along those lines. And I instantly knew that that was God's way, or the Lord's way of showing me, yes, the Book of Mormon is true. So so that morning, so now remember, this is my third day at the MTC. I went to breakfast, and over the speaker, "Brian Ferry, please come to President Pinniger's office." So I go down to President Pinniger's office, and I walk in there, and he says to me, "Can you tell me what happened last night?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, I really need you to tell me what happened last night." I said, "Well, I'm not going to." And he said, well, you really need to tell me what happened last night. And I said, well, I'll tell you what. If you tell me which one of the guys ratted me out to the mission president, I'll tell you what happened. He said, okay. Sometime around 12 o'clock last night, the Lord Jesus Christ appeared to me at the foot of my bed and told me I needed to ask you what happened last night. I said, okay. That's awesome. So let me tell you what happened. So I told him the whole thing, and I talked about the blessing and whatnot. And I don't know if you guys remember President Pinniger, Ed Pinniger, funny guy, short guy, talks like this, really high, right? He's peering over the top of his desk, and he says, "Elder, I need you to go back to your room and pack your bags." And I said, "What? Like, I just had this transformational experience. You're going to send me home?" He's like, "No, you come to the MTC to be prepared to go serve the Lord, and you're prepared. So I'm flying you out tonight."
No way.
So I literally got in a van, drove to the airport, and flew to New Zealand that night.
After
Yeah.
3 days.
Yeah, 3 days. I had a whole 3 days. And then when I landed in New Zealand, sometime we can talk about my experience in New Zealand. It was
I want to talk about your experience in New Zealand. I want to keep this going. We can
okay.
get to other topics. We're going to have you on. The Smoking Prophet's going to be a regular on here.
Okay.
But I'm so engaged in your story at this point. Yeah, I'm so engaged in your story. I want to hear, because everything that's happened so far has been non-traditional. So I
Yeah.
can only imagine what the mission's like. So I want to get the story from the mission. So you get to New Zealand. So
Okay.
let's go there.
Okay.
Get
So
get ready, dude. New Zealand's intense.
so I landed, and the APs picked me up at the airport, and they took me to meet the mission president. And my mission president, a man by the name of Herschel Pedersen, you can look him up. Herschel, they call him Bones Pedersen, an absolutely amazing human being. He his career, he was a steel mill worker. He worked on the blast furnace at Geneva Steel, kind of a roughneck kind of guy. 7'4", giant of a man, right? And he had this deep, resounding voice. And he had that gift of just looking right through you, right? Like you just knew he knew everything. So I sit down to meet with him the first time, and he said, I'm telling you exactly what happened. So he said to me, he said, Elder Ferry, normally we open this conversation by talking about, are there anything that you've done that you need to repent for? And that's normally how we do this. We're not going to do it that way because I know who you are, and I got to talk to you about your first assignment. I said, okay. And he said, he goes, when I was called to serve as mission president in New Zealand, it was a little bit unorthodox. He said, I was actually approached by three men in suits while I was walking through a park in American Fork. And I was told I was going to be mission president. And 3 months later, I was mission president. I said, okay. And he said, during that time, I had a dream. And in my dream, I saw 12 missionaries. And I knew that I would meet those 12 missionaries, and that those 12 had a very specific job to do in New Zealand. And I want to tell you, keep in mind, you guys, I've been on a plane for 21 hours. I haven't slept for 21 hours. So some of this is appearing weird to me. But he says to me, I want to tell you, you are the 12th. You are the last one. And that means that our time together today is I'm going to talk to you about this work that you have to do. And so for the next hour, he talked about some really strange stuff, but kind of gave me a kickstart into what was going to be happening. And he told me my first companion was going to be a real challenge. And he specifically chose this guy because he would be a challenge. So I leave there, and I'm driving out to my first area, and all of this stuff, everything I just told you, is playing back through my head. How did I get here? Oh my gosh, I'm on the other side of the world. And we pulled up to the house that I was going to be living at. And I went in, and the first couple that I met, we actually lived in the basement of this guy's house. He was the bishop, and then he had his one of his counselors over. So there were four people that I met, and the counselor's wife, I sat down, and the first thing she said to me, she said, Elder Ferry, can you tell me what vanity is? And for me, I grew up in the 80s. Vanity was a rock band of girls that sang in lingerie. And that's how I answered it. And she was like, "We have a lot of work to do." She became one of my closest friends and still to this day is. But that was how my first day went. Like it was just kind of weird. And over the next couple of months, the first months that I was there, I learned very quickly that my mission was not going to be like any of my friends and the stories that they told me, right? Because every single day, bizarre stuff would happen. Like I could literally tell you stories that some of them are hilarious, some of them are just I still describe them as weird because they're just not normal. I met some of the most amazing people and had some of the most amazing experiences. And if you asked any of my companions, most of them didn't really recognize that these things were going on. Like we would tract and teach just like everybody else, but we also had these other just amazing experiences. In my first area, my companion, the guy that I said would be a challenge for me, um, he wasn't handicapped, but you know when you fall asleep and you like your neck gets crinked and like the next day you can't move your neck. Well, this guy had done that when he was 14 and it never unkinked. So his head was stuck to the left, right? And I felt so bad for him because I was like, dude, like can't they get that unstuck? Like that's just weird. Anyway, we were out tracting one day and we knocked on this guy's door. His name's Owen. He opens the door and we talked for about 20 minutes on his doorstep. And this guy was fascinating. My companion was like, we got to go. But to me, he was fascinating. And so he invites us in. And as we're walking through the front door, he turns to my companion and he says, your neck's stuck. And my companion said, yeah, it is. And he said, well, would you like me to get it unstuck? And his response was, oh, I've been to specialists. I've been to all kinds of stuff. It's been stuck this way since I was 14. He's like, well, do you want me to get it unstuck? And I told him, yeah, dude, do it. Like, I'm like egging him on to do it. So this guy, he goes in the back room. He comes back out with this little table and he puts my companion on this table. And then he goes into the back room and he's like mixing stuff up in the kitchen. And he comes out with this bowl. It's like full of this black mud. And he wiped this mud all over his neck. And man, it stunk. I don't know what it was, but it unhooked him. Like it literally worked. And it scared the crap out of my companion because he was like, I just was this voodoo magic or what? What did we just do here? Anyway, the yeah. So he ended up. We taught him for several weeks. He was a monk. He was a Chinese monk, a Buddhist monk, and he had in his library all of these LDS books, like all the same ones that I have now. And this guy was just absolutely fascinating. He knew the doctrine and covenants probably better than anyone had ever met, and uh, but he had integrated all of that into his practice in Buddhism. So really, kind of a fascinating start to my mission. So anyway, I spent 2 years and 3 months in New Zealand, and it was literally it was life changing, and it set me on a path to self discovery, uh, and really, I'll just call it a lifelong pursuit of understanding the meaning of the spirit and what the spirit actually is and how we actually interact with it. And it was still the best. I know everybody says it. This is the best 2 years of my life, but it absolutely was.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Maybe now we'll get into um, some of the other things that we want to talk about. And 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 I think it's interesting because today we want to go back to the beginning. So we want to take people back to the Garden of Eden and talk a little bit about that with you. Also, you have a book out there that's called The Myth of Knowing that was you put out there. and then you said you read through it and you're like, I got to get it right, so you pulled it back. Do you have a like, when do you plan on re-releasing that, the Myth of Knowing?
My plan is to release it at Christmas time this year. Uh, I'm very close to having it done. It what I realized, I was telling these guys off the air. I published it, and sold like 6 copies. It was fantastic launch. Uh, and then I actually bought it, and on my wife and I escaped to Vegas for New Year's this year, and I read it to her on the way to Vegas. We were driving, and I realized that there were a lot of things that I needed to go deeper on. So I pulled it back, and I'm hoping to release it by Christmas. So yeah.
Can you give us a general background on what the book is about?
Yeah. So as I said, the my experiences in the temple were transformative, and uh, while I was spending that much time in the temple, I was very thoughtful, and I spent a lot of time in just meditation, trying to understand what it was and what it meant. And consequently, I have now studied the Genesis story, if you will, in all of its iterations. The Genesis story is found in virtually every culture of the world, and I have studied them all. And what is interesting for me is the story of Genesis, and even the way that it is presented is what I would say is one of the most misunderstood books of the Bible, one of the most misunderstood things in the church. And when I say misunderstood, I don't want to come across as being somebody who knows more than someone else, which is why I called the book The Myth of Knowing. Because the reality is, the tree of knowledge, this concept that we can actually know a thing, is one of the great dangers of being human. The symbol of the tree of knowledge, by the way, the one that if you eat the fruit thereof, in that day you will surely die. The symbolism of knowledge and what we think we know is probably the thing that keeps us from becoming the supernatural beings that we actually are. The And so I wrote the book. The Myth of Knowing is my experience. It's not my interpretation. It's my experience of the endowment of power. And the endowment of power is the power of God unto creation. And so I in the book I walk through all of the different scenes of the story in Genesis, the one found in Moses, the one found in the Torah, the one found in the Quran, the one found in the Sanskrit. Like
The
it
Sumerian tablets, you're
the
even hitting those.
the
Okay,
Su-
the Sanskrit.
The Sumerian, yeah, the Sumerian tablets. I spent, interestingly, when I was in New Zealand, I had a class that I taught at Waikato University on. It was a 1 hour class that students could sign up for, on the Book of the Dead and the Book of Abraham. And how that came about is I was out tracting one day, and I met this guy and his wife, and they were both professors at Waikato. And so they created this class, and I would come in and talk about the Sumerian culture and sort of the story of Enki, Enlil, and all of this. And but I did it in the form of these are symbols. These are things that are meant to open your mind and get you to think and feel in a different way. And so the concept that it is a story about the creation of man, maybe, I mean, that's an interesting way to tell the story. I don't think it's a story about the creation of man. I think it's the story of creation of you, and it's the entire story is an expression of you. And so the way that I this is going to take us off track just a little bit, but
No,
the way,
I think this is really good because if you go to the temple says pretend like you are Adam or you are Eve
that's
or
right.
you become them. So So the story isn't about them, it's actually about you.
Yeah, but here's the big but. What it's actually saying is you, Shane, are Adam and Eve. See, this is one of the big
Now
this
that's deep. Now I like that.
yeah,
I like where you're
this
going
is
here.
this
So
is one of the big misunderstandings. A lot of times I equate it to the story of the Wizard of Oz. And I'll make parallels as we go through this, because the entire story of the Wizard of Oz, the entire experience happened in her mind. None of it happened in reality. So the scarecrow was not some external thing. The scarecrow was a figment of her mind.
the scarecrow was her
That's right.
because it was in her
Right.
mind.
Right. Yeah. So let's make some quick parallels because it's kind of fun. So Adam is the first to appear. Adam is created as a man, and Adam is symbolic of your intellect, your ability to reason things out in your mind. Eve, which was taken out of Adam, is your emotions,
Feelings.
energy,
Yes.
energy in motion.
Yes.
That is what Eve represents. Now, I will say I have not been to the temple since 1991. And I know there are a lot of changes that have happened. So any references that I make, I will hold sacred. But any references that I make are purely intellectual. I'm not making any doctrinal claims. I'm just saying how I see it, right? It used to be, and it was found to be offensive, I think. I don't know. I wasn't part of the decision-making process, but it used to be that the women at a certain place in the process would veil their faces, and they would be covenanted to follow their husband as long as he was following the Lord. What that's really talking about is your emotions. If your emotions are in charge, then you are likely not reasoning things out in your mind. So you should subdue your emotions, because the power of God unto creation is this simple. I heard on your podcast the other day you were talking about superposition and quantum physics. I spent 2 years in college getting a master's degree in quantum medicine. And the concept of quantum physics, which is completely misunderstood right now, we don't get it, but we're starting to get it. But the power of God unto creation, the way that reality actually comes to be, is a thought. Adam combines with Eve in a sacred marriage, and that creates reality. Uh,
Thought plus emotion.
thoughts with the energy that they need to become things. So in the beginning, God looked upon the face of the deep, and he saw that there was a void. And the void, I have an entire chapter in my book about the void. As the universe ebbs and flows, and the fabric of space and time, right? In these little spaces are voids. When you feel a void in your life, like something is missing, like I need something more, or I want to create something new, those voids literally get filled with thoughts and emotions. And that is how reality unfolds. Now, if we look at each of the different, remembering that you are Adam, Eve, you are the serpent, you are the servants, you are Christ, you are God, you are all those things in the story of creation. So when, for example, when Adam and Eve are being, quote, tempted to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge, the serpent initially goes to Adam and makes an intellectual argument that he should take the fruit. And of course, Adam says, no, that doesn't intellectually make sense. Well, then he goes to Eve, the emotions, and at first, he makes an intellectual argument. He makes it's a logic based thing. And Eve says, oh, no, we would never do that. But then he makes an emotional argument. The emotional argument is that you will be like the gods and you will have all this knowledge and blah, 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 right? Well, then she partakes. So the emotions partakes of the fruit of knowledge, the fruit of the tree of knowledge. But what can emotions do with knowledge? Nothing. In fact, our emotions primarily are generated from the limbic brain, the inner core of our brain. That's the part of the brain that doesn't even process language, or excuse me, the neocortex. The neocortex has all of your processing for language. If you have a neocortical stroke, you know what you want to say, but you can't say it,
Can't say it. Yeah.
right? So the limbic brain has no capacity for language. It doesn't speak language. So where the brain interacts, the thoughts and the emotions interact, that's how reality comes to be. And so when we talk about the serpent, all too often, the serpent is equated with Lucifer, which is a whole nother conversation who Lucifer is. But the serpent is not Lucifer. The serpent is guilt and shame. If you look at what the serpent actually does, what the serpent does is tells Adam and Eve that they should be afraid of God. Well, who in this scenario is God? Is it God the Father? Is it Jesus? Is it the servants that he sent? No, it's you. It's your higher self. It's the God in you. So the
Mm-hmm.
serpent is literally telling them to be ashamed to be in the presence of their higher self. That by definition is guilt and shame. So what happens is we allow guilt and shame to come into our life, and that keeps us from being the infinite powerful creators that we are.
And Brian, maybe that's why in the temple, the first command is from the serpent telling you to put on the apron to cover your shame,
That's
right?
correct.
And then we all do it. I mean, I'm looking at it, I'm like, why am I listening to this guy telling me to put this on? I'm not going to listen to this guy. In my head, that's what I'm saying. I'm doing it because everybody else is doing it. But in my head, I'm going, why am I listening to Satan? And why am I doing what Satan's telling me to do here in the temple today?
What's up, guys? Thanks for tuning into this episode. Be sure to share this episode with your friends and your family on any platform, whether that be Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or however you send messages. Get it out to people. We have grown our channel in just 45 days to 3,000 subscribers, and our goal is to get to 30,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and we need your help. So if you like our content, please do us a solid and share it with your neighbor.
Right.
Yeah, Brian, one of the teachings that you taught me 15 years ago, was who in the endowment ceremony cast the shame. Where does that come from? And for whatever reason, that was such a big thing to me, because I realized it's like, okay, Satan is the one that's pushing me away from God, and I relate that to any time I've sinned. What do? I'm like hesitant to say a prayer. I'm hesitant to repent. I feel guilty. I feel dirty. And he does that. He shames them right then and there. He's like, you're naked, hide.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that, and this is really important to this dialogue, is that that so-called Satan is you. It's not an external being that is trying to get you to do something bad. It's you. You're the one that is casting the guilt and shame. But what another interesting thing is, in the temple, there are all these different symbols, but one of the symbols is the robe of the holy priesthood. And the robe of the holy priesthood is what makes you the powerful, infinite creator that you are. And yet, throughout the entire thing, guilt and shame is on top. Guilt and shame is always enveloping you. And so the trick, or the inspiration, is get rid of the guilt and shame. Like, if you get rid of the guilt and shame, you're now an infinitely powerful creator. And here's the other thing. You are an infinitely powerful creator. And what that means is you are creating your reality and your life, everything in it. I was telling my wife, this is several months ago, I was telling her that when we make decisions, you guys were talking about this the other night on your show, that reality can't happen without observation. It literally wouldn't exist if consciousness wasn't observing it. So if you think about it in that perspective, every single decision, every choice that you make makes reality unfold right before your eyes. And she was saying to me, well, that's just out there and you're crazy. And I said, no, watch. Let's go to Costco. So we got in the car and we literally pulled out into my cul-de-sac, and I turned to her and I said, which way do you want to go, left or right? And she said, take the fastest route there. I said, well, I don't know what's the fastest route. You want to go right or left? She goes, go left. And then we get to the next street. I said, you want to go right or left? She said, Brian, Costco is to the right. I said, well, hun, Costco is on a globe. We could go to the left. It would take us a lot longer to get there, but we could go east and end up in the west. I don't know if you know how the globe thing works. My point being, literally every single decision we make, every choice we make makes reality unfold. And it's easy to talk about going to Costco, but what about creating infinite freedom, creating infinite power, creating infinite truth? All of that is held back by our guilt and shame, which is why God told us not to partake the fruit of that tree. And when you understand that this thing called knowledge is what actually prevents you from being the infinite powerful creator that you are, that's where the power of God comes from. Everybody, a lot of
Which
people, I
which
should say.
which Brian make listen. It makes sense that we pass through a veil of forgetfulness and we lose whatever knowledge we did have, because if we had all that information, I'm not sure we could truly process all of that information coming into this reality, into
We
this
couldn't.
experience.
Yeah.
We
Yeah, we
would have
couldn't.
so much information that we would be afraid to make a decision because of who knows how much experience we've had. And so that's why knowledge can create that shame. So while knowledge is a great thing and we should seek knowledge, it also does exactly what you're talking about and can create shame.
Right. But
And it
there's
also, oh,
there,
sorry, I wanted to say it also kills any creation. It's the opposite of faith, right? That fear, that doubt, shame, it's in that same vein, right? And in creating, in goal making and planning, anytime that you start thinking through it too much, you start analyzing it too much, you start creating your own blocks, you start creating your own impediments, and that's what stops anyone from creating is that
yeah.
fear.
Well, and what I'll say about that, Shane, you said, of course we want to seek knowledge, and without saying it abruptly, that is absolutely not true. We should not be seeking knowledge, and here's why: you already know it all.
That's true.
You already know it all.
Yeah, we just
Here,
need to remember.
what we should be seeking is what Joseph referred to as light and truth. Now, I want to talk about that for a second because there is, I think, again, a language barrier. It's simply a language barrier
Well,
when we talk about truth.
Brian, so let me just interject this right here. I've been thinking a lot about Solomon. And I'm like, here's a guy, he asks for wisdom
Yes.
and he gets wisdom. But then what does he do? He ends up having wives and concubines, and the Lord's not pleased with him. So the wisdom didn't translate into him being closer to God. In fact, it may have done the opposite. And I've just been pondering that whole experience. Like, if he had all this wisdom, why did he do these things?
Yeah. And so uh my reaction to that's going to be slightly different than you might think. Okay? When we look at stories like the story of Melchizedek, for example, or we look at the story of Joshua, or we look at the story of Daniel, or we look at the story of Jesus Christ. When we look at these stories and we interact with them, you have to understand that as you're interacting with those stories, and they're just stories, as you're interacting with those stories, there is something really powerful going on. Your intellect is going crazy. I need to understand as much as I can about this information. And your emotions are going crazy. Your emotions are getting right in there in the mix, and this is what we do. Even though we don't realize we're doing it, we start to apply guilt and shame to the stories. So when people tell the story of Jesus, they always say he was the only sinless man. He was the only guy that didn't ever do anything wrong. But in order to make that supposition, in order to make that statement, something has to be wrong, right? In order for a guy to do everything right, then there must be the opposite of that, which is everything wrong. But what if all of that's an illusion? See, when God created if you go back to the creation sequence, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This was a whole chapter before he divided the firmament, before he created the sun. So what was the light that he created when he said, "Let there be light"? It was us.
Truth.
It was
Us.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was consciousness, the light of truth. Now, if you go through, you're going to do this, I promise. If you go back through Genesis chapter 1, nothing physical was created. Not one thing. Genesis 2, everything physical is created. Now, here's the power in understanding that. Everything you create in your life, everything that becomes real for you, is created in here with your intellect and your emotions before it manifests in
That's
reality,
right. I
before it
wrote a whole book on
manifests
this. Yes.
physically. So now if we go back to that dialogue, what is the tree of life? What do we know about the tree of life?
Well, we know it's very important because it got protected. We know that if they were to have partaken of it, it wouldn't have served the right purpose. Um, when I think of the tree of life, I think of like mothers. I don't know. I'm just tossing
What
out
do we
ideas as I
what
do.
do, what do we learn from Nephi's dream about the tree of life?
Pure love of God.
It is the love of God, with one really important part. Everybody always leaves this out. It is the love of God as it sheddeth itself abroad in the hearts of the children of men. The tree of life is when we love the way that God loves.
Mm.
When we have God love. Now, when we have God love, can we look upon Solomon and say, "Why did you do all this bad stuff?" Can we do that? If we have the love of God in our heart, is it possible for us to look at the things that Solomon did? And he did some stuff, no doubt. So did Joseph Smith, right? We all
So
do. We all do.
yeah, so for me it was interesting. So I don't know if you know this. I spent 5 years in prison, but
I did
while
not
I
know that.
was while I was in there, I was there from 2015 to 2020, and I was around all types of offenders, whether it be sex offenders. I was around murderers. I was around gang members. I was around drug addicts. And as I would talk to them and get to know them, I all of a sudden said, boy, if I would have had that experience, if I would have been raised that way, if I would have had those circumstances, who says that I wouldn't have done exactly the same thing that you did? And I learned how to love everybody regardless of who they were or where they've been or what they've done, because I looked at their situation and I said, who says I wouldn't have done the same thing if I would have been in their same situation or in their same
Yeah.
shoes? And I
Yeah.
often wonder if God says, I understand why you did that. Like, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an often quoted passage in the Book of Mormon that I think is misunderstood, where it says that God cannot look upon sin with the least degree of allowance. I think that's completely misunderstood, because I don't think God looks at the things that we're doing in this life and go, "Oh yeah, that was bad." Because in order for God to look at something that we're doing and say, "Oh, that's bad," then he'd also have to say, "Well, that over there is good." And what he actually said was, "I looked upon the face of the deep, and I looked upon the man, and I said that it was good." It's all good. There isn't. He never once said, and oh, by the way, on Tuesday I looked at it and most of them were bad. So if we look at this, I'll tell you another really cool experience I had. I set the stage for all of this, you guys. I'm a contrarian. If
Can
you
you explain how you interpret that scripture about God looking upon sin with the least degree of allowance?
Yeah,
Can you
yeah.
maybe explain what's being said there? Because I too think it's often misused, and I'm
So
curious as to
so the,
your
so the, so the big
thoughts.
the big thing that's misunderstood is whenever the scriptures talk about God, it's talking about you. And you, because you live with guilt and shame, cannot look upon sin with the least degree of allowance. So what happens is you are like me and you start smoking when you're 12. You stop for 2 years and you come back and start again because you really like it. And so now you're a smoker, right? And then it's time to go to church on Sunday and you say to yourself, can't take the sacrament. I got freaking smoking, right? So I'm not taking the sacrament because I think I'm bad, because God, me, can't look upon sin with the least degree of allowance. The
Mm.
only thing that Christ did, the only thing, was look upon sin with the least degree of allowance. Total allowance. There isn't one thing that is. In fact, I believe Joseph Smith said it this way: your sins can be as scarlet, and he will not turn you away. That's the love of Christ. Now, we can talk about the love of God, which is you, the love of Christ, which is you, and the love of self, which is you. We always hear about the stories about the war in heaven, right? Satan fighting, and half of them went that way and half of them this way. And well, what does that really mean? Like, were we in a war? Is it like guns and stuff, or what was it? No, the war in heaven is the war that happens in our head. It's the war that we go back and forth. I'm not worthy. I'm good enough. I'm not good enough. That's the war, right? I teach this. I shouldn't say I teach it. I tell people this principle. I'm not a teacher. Um, when you look at the commandments, and there are lots of them, right? I at one point I went through the entire Book of Mormon and I found out that there was 694 commandments in the Book of Mormon. So there's a lot of them, right? And when you look at anything, let's take the law of tithing, for example. If you if you live the law of tithing, you pay every single month, you pay on time and the exact amount you're supposed to pay. Then and if you're doing that, because if you don't, you're going to go to the telestial kingdom instead of the celestial kingdom, then you are living the law of tithing according to the law of the telestial kingdom, because it is the law of the self. You're paying tithing for self-salvation, for self-preservation. If in your heart you are paying your tithing because you know that that money will go to help others, the law of others is the law of the terrestrial kingdom. Who rules and reigns in the terrestrial kingdom? Christ.
Christ.
Christ's entire mission was about others. He came here for us. So if you're living that law and you're doing it because in your heart you know it will help others, then you are living the law of tithing at the terrestrial level. If you are walking down the road and the Spirit whispers in your voice, take a left, turn right, and give that guy $100, now you're living the law of tithing
Celestial.
according to the celestial law. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So if we look back at the notion that they're right and wrong, right? I think there's even a verse in the Book of Mormon that says someday a prophet's going to come and tell you, eat, drink, and be merry. You can do whatever you want. There's nothing right and wrong, right? That's me, because what I want you to do is live your life to the fullest, and I want you to be true to yourself, and I want you to believe in Christ within you, and I want you to become Christ within you. That's why we're here. We're not here to be tested or tried. Like that's if you actually think about it, that really sets up God to be kind of a narcissist, right? Like, I'm going to send you down there and see if you can be the guy that I want you to be, and if you can't, you're out of here. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So
Well, so Brian, I I don't I don't necessarily agree with all of what you're saying and I want to propose something like, can't both of those things be true? In other words, can't the scriptures have depth of that being like, it's talking about God in you, Christ in you, etc., and also be talking about God and also be talking about Christ? Like, to me, I don't, I have a hard time connecting that.
Well,
And
certainly all of what you just said is uh, real in the physical telestial world that we live in, right? There are certainly passages that speak directly of Jesus, or Jehovah, right? Um, but for me, uh, and I sort of follow this thinking of likening the scriptures unto yourself. So I think, I don't know, bro. Like, you and I've talked about this before. Did Job, did that actually happen? Did Jonah actually live in a whale? Like, I don't know. And it really doesn't matter to me, because what the scriptures teach us is to learn who we are so that we can become what we are meant to become. And that's another thing that's a little bit strange. You already are that. You're not. I saw a podcast yesterday with this anti-Mormon guy talking to a Mormon guy, and he was like, "You think you can become God?" And the guy answered, "Well, no, we don't think it exactly that way." I would have said, "No, I don't think I can become God. I am. I
that's awesome.
already am." And the real thing, the reason, if you need one for us to be here, some people say, well, we needed to go through this test, right? This proving period. Uh, there's even that passage in the Pearl of Great Price that says, I'll prove them now herewith, if they will do all things whatsoever the Lord their God shall command them. And that's true. But the Lord that's commanding them is them. It's literally, how do we become one with God? If God is perfect, which we can just assume that that's a thing, if God is perfect, then God is light and love. That's what he is. He's perfect light and love. And so are we. It's just all the other stuff that we let get in the way, that and that's why we're here. We're here to recognize who we are and be that. I actually think Enoch figured it out, so he was done. He didn't
Yeah,
need to be here anymore.
exactly. And I think Jesus, when he says, "Do the things that you've seen me do," he's, and this is why he got crucified, because he said what you said, Brian, which is, "I am." I mean, that's what he was saying, and he was saying, "You are too. I
Right.
am, and you are too." And
Yeah,
and
his
we get so caught up, like, who are you to say that you are this, or are you say that you're God? Well, if you are a child of God, if that is your father, then you're that's your DNA too.
yeah.
So
Remember
you're the same.
remember how I said I would liken it back to the Wizard of Oz, which we can do a whole episode on the Wizard of Oz. But if you think about it, she's living a life that she doesn't like. It's all dark and dreary. She onks her head. She goes to sleep. She has a dream. She goes to Oz, goes through the entire experience of Oz, the entire experience of Oz. And at the very end, what happens? The good witch comes back and says, "Oh, Dorothy, you could have done it all along. The power to get home is you." And I think that's how it works. When we die, we go up there and we meet God, and God says, "Oh, Brian, you you had it all along,"
Yeah.
right? I did want to mention one other experience, and I think we're going over time, but uh, I had one of the coolest experiences of my life in a little area in New Zealand called Tolaga Bay. It's a beautiful bay on the east coast, and there was a guy in the ward who had he was in his late 90s, and he and I were having a discussion about very similar to what we're talking about now, and he asked me something about Judas Iscariot, and I had studied Judas Iscariot quite a bit, and I have my own thoughts about the story there, and I had this experience where I was talking to this guy about how awful it was that Judas, turned Christ in. And he said to me, what if that's not how it happened? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, what if when Jesus said, I'm going to kiss the one who will betray me, what if that was Jesus asking him to do it, calling him to do it? Because somebody had to do it. And in that moment, everything I had ever thought about Judas completely left. And then a few weeks later, I was reading in the Doctrine and Covenants, and there is a place in the Doctrine and Covenants where Joseph says that he saw Christ and the 12 apostles who were with him in his ministry on his right hand. And I realized right then that Judas was in that mix. Judas was one of the 12 that was with him in his ministry. So all of a sudden I realized I got to stop judging people. Like, I don't have a clue. And it is that knowledge, right? We think we know better than other people, when in reality, God looked upon it all and said, it is good.
There's an apocryphal book that talks about that Judas was it was part of the plan, and somebody had to do it. You're right.
Well, and you look at the stories in Moses and Abraham, the here am I stories, right? How, and this is maybe a topic for another time, but how does that work? Like, here am I, send me. I'll go do that role. And if we think about that, that opens up a whole new meaning to Alma chapter 13, verse 1, and the foreordination of man. So
How so? Touch on that briefly.
oh, we don't want to start down that rabbit hole, bro.
That too long?
We'll do a whole nother episode on that. I think a lot of my takeaways are, we are Adam and Eve. What do those represent? Men tend to think their way through the universe. Women feel their way through the universe. That exists inside of both of us. I think that's really powerful. And for people going to the temple, that's a unique way to look at it. And it's opened my mind to a variety of things, especially as far as creation is concerned. So, David, do you want to try your mic and see? You have a question?
Can you hear me? So I just wanted to share with you, Brian. I had an experience on my mission where I was in a line at Chipotle, and while at Chipotle, just right after the zone conference, and while in this line, I'm just waiting, and I have this lady in front of me with her child, and I have other missionaries behind me, and I'm realizing that all of these people are my brothers and sisters. And then I realized that God loves them just as much as he loves me. And after realizing that is that I realized if he loves them as much as he loves me, then there's nothing stopping me from loving them as much as he loves me. Yeah. That's when I had to tap in to understanding charity and a little bit what you said. There was one other thing I wanted to touch on too, just what you were saying. It reminded me about how there's neither bad or good. There just is. And we get to decide what's good. So even the sins or even the mistakes or all the things that we say, oh, that's bad, those things, even Joseph was told that it was all,
it's all good. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all good.
For our experience.
Well, here's here's the thing. The only way that you can look upon something and say it's good or bad is to pluck the fruit of that tree. It is one tree, one fruit of knowledge of good and evil. So the only way you can say something is good or bad is to eat the fruit of the tree that's 5 seconds later you're dead, right? So and I wanted to say just one thing about your experience in that line. I think we all have that experience at some point in life, right? Where we're just, especially right now, the world is so divisive over the dumbest stuff. Like literally the people that are like, we're fighting over the dumbest stuff, right? And here's what I'll say about that. You had what I would call the initiatory of charity. And the reason I say it's the initiatory is because you have to have that step first, right? but you said something and I want to key on it because this will maybe take us into another conversation another day. If God loves them as much as he loves me, then I can love them as much as he loves them, right? But that presupposes that love has degrees. There is no degree in love. There is only degrees in hate. I hate that person a lot, or I hate that person a little. There are no degrees in love. Love is perfect. So you can't say he loves them as much as. He just loves them perfectly. And that's where we all have to come to, is that God is love. That's what God is.
That's how I saw it. Is that as much as was full
Yeah,
love.
perfect love. Yes.
There was no room for anything else. So my experience after that moment, and it lasted for some time. And my experience was just looking at my brothers and sisters, realizing that I could treat them like they were my actual brothers or members of
Yes.
my family. And I no longer looked with these filters. I looked at them for the way that they are or could be. And then, speaking to them, it was just exciting to
Yeah.
talk to them, to learn about them, to be interested in their lives, to see if I could learn from them as well.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of doors open from
Yeah,
that
and
kind of
and
love.
and you know what's fascinating is the moment that the waters bring forth a living being and we come into this world, it takes about 3 years for us to learn that we need filters. We don't have them when we're 3 years old, right? We have to learn them. And it's really unfortunate, right? Because in my family, I learned a lot of my filters from kind of a jackass. Like my grandpa was a jackass and he taught me all of those jackass things, right? And what's funny is when I finally realized that all those things were just dumb, and like I said a minute ago, we're fighting over the dumbest things. I mean, we have a political discourse right now that has presidential candidates talking about whether they're a better golfer than the other guy. Like, this is how intellectually moronic we have become. And that's because we believe, and this is the tree of knowledge of good and evil just at work, right? We believe that someone has to be right and someone has to be wrong. We think that life is a zero-sum game. And if I'm more right than you, then you're more wrong than me. And all of that's just made up. It's literally made up. I was telling my wife the other day, if I was born in southern Jerusalem and my best friend was born 1 inch away from me in southern Israel, I'm supposed to hate him, and he's supposed to hate me because of an imaginary line that somebody drew with an imaginary crayon. Like, we are absolutely, our world is completely jacked up, and it's all because of the myth of knowing. It's all because we think we know. I mean, the Palestinians and the Jews, or the people of Judah, if you think about it, are fighting over a rock that 3,000 years ago something significant happened on. That by definition is insane. And the fact that one of my best friends in the whole world lives in Tehran, Iran. I'm not supposed to be friends with her, but I am. So that's what the tree of knowledge does to us. And as long as we think that I'm in pursuit of knowledge, I'm gonna become more knowledgeable, and if I'm more knowledgeable than you, then I'm better off than the other guy, right? Jeez, that's so dumb. We should all go back to being like 3-year-olds and just eat hot dogs and bonbons.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Smoking Prophet, Brian Ferry, thank you so much for coming on. You dropped some major truth bombs. I'm excited for the comment section on this one. I can see the comment section really exploding. I'm excited to dive into some other topics and really pick a topic and go deep with you on those topics. I appreciate you sharing your story and being like open and vulnerable and authentic and just being who you are. I have had an experience where I had somebody come to me and say, I am that I am. And I don't know who this person was, but this person told me, Shane, it's all about self-confidence. So I think turning inward and recognizing that there is a higher self, an other self, as I call it in my book, and tapping in and tuning into that can be really, really important, and tapping into the God within all of us. So, Brian, thank you again so much for coming on. Trevor, David, any final thoughts? All good? Okay.
Thanks for
For
having me. This was
myself,
fun.
for myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. For my partners over there, Trevor Keys, David the Lion Douglas, Brian Ferry, thank you so much for coming on to the Key of David podcast, and we're looking forward to many more episodes with you in the future.
Thank you.